"I'll heal you if you give me your lunch," said the poor girl to the sick millionaire. Richard Peterson stared disinterestedly at the tray of expensive food resting on the table in his luxurious room at Mercy General Hospital, the most exclusive in New York City. He had been hospitalized for 3 months, and the best doctors in the country couldn't figure out what was making him weaker and robbing him of his appetite. That's when a little girl, no more than 6 years old, appeared at the door of his room and pointed directly at him. "I'll heal you if you give me your lunch," she said, with such casualness that it left Richard completely bewildered. The child had messy hair, simple and worn-out clothes, and a determination in her eyes that contrasted with her fragile appearance. Richard blinked a few times, wondering if the medication was making him hallucinate. "How did you get in here?" he managed to ask, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Through the service stairs," she replied, stepping closer without fear. "My name is Emily, and you need me more than you need that food." Richard tried to call the nurses but realized the emergency button was out of reach. The girl noticed his movement and shook her head. "It's no use calling anyone. They won't believe I made it up here. Besides, you'll want to hear me out first." "Hear what?" Richard asked, intrigued despite his exhaustion. "The truth about what's wrong with you," Emily said, climbing onto the chair beside the bed. "My grandma had the same thing you do, and she only got better when she stopped eating alone." Richard laughed bitterly. "Kid, I have the best doctors in the United States taking care of me. You think a 6-year-old can solve something they can't?" "I'm 7, Emily corrected. "And yes, I know what you have because I spend all day here. I see everyone who gets sick and everyone who gets better. You're sick, but not with what the doctors think. The hospital's security was strict. How had a child slipped past all the checkpoints?" Richard studied Emily's determined face and felt something he hadn't experienced in months: curiosity. "All right," he said. "Tell me what you think I have." "You have the sickness of loneliness," Emily replied without hesitation. "My grandma had it when Grandpa left. She stopped eating, got weak, got sad. The doctors gave her lots of medicine, but nothing worked." "And how did she get better?" Richard asked, more to humor the child than out of belief. "When I started making food for her and eating with her. Food only becomes medicine when you share it with someone who cares about you." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now, back to the story. Richard fell silent for a long moment. The girl's words echoed strangely in his mind. When was the last time he had shared a meal with someone? When was the last time someone genuinely cared about whether he ate? "If you give me your food," Emily continued, "I'll eat here with you, and you'll see, you'll get better." "Are you hungry?" Richard asked, noticing how the girl's eyes lit up as she looked at the tray. "I'm always hungry," she admitted, "but that's not why I came here." "Then why?" "Because you need help, and I know how to help." Richard studied the determination on the child's face. There was something about her that stirred a distant memory, a feeling he couldn't quite place. He pushed the tray toward Emily. "Go ahead," he said, "but tell me how you got here without anyone seeing you." Emily's eyes sparkled. She picked up the fork and began eating with a hunger that tugged at Richard's heart. "Between bites," she explained. "My mom works here. She's a janitor on the night shift. I stay with my grandma in the hospital basement while she works." "In the basement?" Richard sat up in bed. "You live here?" "Sort of," said Emily, avoiding his gaze. "Miss Patricia lets us stay down there in exchange for my mom doing extra work." Patricia, his sister-in-law, the hospital administrator. Richard felt a stab of anger. How could she allow employees to live on hospital grounds? "And you're alone while your mom works?" "No, I'm with Grandma. But she's sick, so I take care of her. And during the day when she sleeps, I go upstairs to see people." "See people?" "Yeah," Emily wiped the plate clean with a piece of bread. "I like to see who's sad, who's scared, who's lonely. Then I try to help." "Help how?" "Sometimes I just talk. Sometimes I draw something for them. Once I sang a song for a lady who couldn't sleep." Richard was stunned. A 7-year-old roaming the hospital freely, offering comfort to patients. "And no one's ever noticed you?" The nurses think I'm a patient's kid. The doctors don't even look at me. The only one who knows I exist is Miss Patricia, and she pretends not to see me." Richard's anger grew. His sister-in-law knew about this and had said nothing. Worse, she was taking advantage of this family's vulnerability. "Emily, where's your mum now?" "Working. She won't be back until early morning." "And your grandma?" "Sleeping downstairs. She sleeps a lot because she's really tired." Richard watched the girl finish her meal. For the first time in months, he felt he'd done something meaningful. Seeing someone eat with such pleasure stirred a strange feeling in him, almost like hunger. "Emily, you said your grandma had the same thing as me. How did you know I had the loneliness sickness?" The girl looked at him with a seriousness beyond her years. "Because you eat without tasting. When someone eats alone for too long, food just becomes a chore. Then the body gets weak because the food doesn't really nourish you." "That's not medically sound," Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's heart sound," Emily replied. "My grandma always said, food made with love feeds the body. Food made just out of duty only feeds the belly." "What's the difference?" "The belly gets full, but the person stays hungry inside." The girl's words hit Richard like a punch. He really was hungry inside, an emptiness no expensive meal could fill. "Will you come back tomorrow?" he asked, surprising himself. "If you want," Emily said. "But there's a condition." "What?" "You have to eat with me. Just giving me food won't work. The healing only happens when we eat together." Richard nodded, not fully understanding why. There was something about this child that calmed him in a way no doctor ever had. "All right. Tomorrow I'll eat with you." Emily smiled for the first time since entering the room, a smile so genuine and bright it lit up the whole space. She climbed down from the chair and headed for the door. "Emily," Richard called, "how did you know I'd let you eat my food?" She turned and looked at him with that peculiar wisdom. "Because very lonely people always want to help someone. They just don't know how." And she left the room, leaving Richard with much to think about. That night, for the first time in weeks, Richard slept without nightmares. He dreamed of his childhood, sharing sandwiches with friends at school, his mother always setting an extra plate for whoever showed up at lunch. He woke with a strange feeling in his stomach. It took him a few minutes to recognize it. Hunger. Real hunger. When the breakfast tray arrived, he left it untouched, waiting for Emily. He couldn't explain why, but he felt she'd keep her promise. Around 10 o'clock, he heard small footsteps in the hallway. The door opened slowly and Emily appeared carrying a steaming bowl. "Good morning, Mr. Richard," she said, as if they were old friends. "Good morning, Emily. What did you bring there?" "Oatmeal my grandma made. She said it's good for making people strong." Richard looked at the simple bowl, so different from the hospital's fancy tray. The aroma rising from the oatmeal stirred more childhood memories. "Is your grandmother feeling better today?" "A little. She was happy when I told her I'd found someone to share food with." Emily climbed onto the chair and placed the bowl on the table. Then she went to the hospital tray and grabbed 2 spoons. "Now we'll eat together," she said, offering a spoon to Richard. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The oatmeal was simple, but it had a flavor Richard hadn't tasted in years, a flavor of care, of tenderness. "Emily," he said, "tell me about your family." "There's not much to tell," she replied. "It's just me, my mom, and my grandma. My dad left when I was a baby." "And how did you end up here?" "My mom lost her job and our home. Grandma got sick and needed expensive medicine. Mrs. Patricia offered my mom work, but said she couldn't pay much. In exchange, she let her stay in the basement." "How long have you been here?" 2 years. 2 years. Richard felt a tightness in his chest. His sister-in-law had been exploiting this family for 2 years, and he'd known nothing about it. "Emily, do you go to school?" The girl lowered her eyes. "I can't. We don't have a fixed address, and Mrs. Patricia said if anyone finds out we live here, we'll have to leave." Richard's anger grew with each revelation. Patricia was keeping a child from education to protect an illegal scheme. "And what do you do all day?" "I take care of Grandma, help my mum when I can, and walk around the hospital. I like talking to people. Isn't it dangerous for a child to be alone here?" Everyone here is nice, Emily said. The patients like talking to me. Some give me candy, others tell me stories. And the doctors? They don't even see us. To them, only the people who pay a lot exist. The cruel simplicity of her observations struck Richard. He'd been the same before his illness, only seeing those who mattered to his business. Emily, you said you observe people here. What else have you noticed about me? The girl chewed thoughtfully before answering. You're angry at someone. It's not just loneliness, it's hurt too. Hurt at who? I don't know. But sometimes, when I pass by your door, I heard you talking on the phone. You always sounded mad at someone. Richard remembered the arguments he'd had with partners, with Patricia herself about the hospital's management, with employees he'd deemed incompetent. And that has to do with my illness? My grandma says anger is like a beast that eats you from the inside. If you don't feed it right, it eats everything and leaves nothing for the person. And how do you feed anger right? By talking about it, sharing it with someone who cares. The child's words were simple, but they carried a truth Richard had ignored for months. He really was being eaten from the inside, not just by loneliness, but by the anger he'd let build up. Mr. Richard, Emily said, finishing the oatmeal, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you get rich? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean? Why did you want to be rich? To buy things? To be important? Richard thought back. When he'd started working, young and driven, his goal had been simple, to never go without again, like he had as a child. But somewhere along the way, money had become an end in itself. I wanted security, he admitted. I didn't want to depend on anyone. And now do you have security? I do. Then why are you sick? The girl's question was too direct, too painful. Richard didn't know how to answer. My grandma says real security isn't about having lots of money. It's about having people who care about you. And do you have those people, Emily? I have my mum and my grandma. And now I have you too, right? Richard's heart tightened. A 7-year-old girl, living in the basement of a hospital, considered him part of her family. Yes, he said, his voice choked. Now you have me too. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. In the following days, Emily returned religiously. She always brought some simple food prepared by her grandmother, a vegetable soup, homemade bread, fruit cut with care, and she always insisted they eat together. Richard began to notice subtle changes in his body. His appetite slowly returned, his strength grew. But more important were their conversations. Emily had a unique way of asking questions that made him reflect on his life. It was during one of these talks that Richard decided to meet the girl's grandmother. He wanted to understand where so much wisdom came from. Emily, can you take me to meet your grandma? The girl's eyes lit up. She'll be so happy, but can you walk all the way down there? Let's find out. Richard had requested medical discharge several times in recent months, but the doctors always claimed he wasn't ready. This time he simply left the room, leaning on Emily. They took the service elevators down to the hospital basement. The contrast with the upper floors was striking. Down there, the hallways were darker, the smell of cleaning products stronger. Emily guided him through a maze of storage rooms to a small door at the back. When she opened it, Richard was shocked by what he saw. It was a tiny space where 3 people barely fit. In the corner was a thin mattress where an elderly woman rested. Near the wall, a few makeshift kitchen utensils sat on a small table. Clothes hung from a line stretched between the walls. Grandma, I brought Richard to meet you, Emily announced. The woman rose slowly. Despite her apparent frailty, her eyes were lively and kind. She was black, her graying hair tied in a simple bun, wearing a clean but heavily mended dress. Welcome, Mr. Richard, she said softly. I'm Dorothy. The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Dorothy, Richard replied, moved. Emily tells me so much about you. I hope it's good things, she smiled. Always. Your granddaughter is a very special girl. She has a gift, Dorothy said, stroking Emily's hair. She's always known when someone needs help. Richard looked around the small space. How could these people live with so little and still radiate such peace? Mrs. Dorothy, Emily told me you also had the sickness of loneliness. The woman nodded. When my husband passed 3 years ago, I stopped living. I just existed. Didn't eat right, didn't sleep right. This girl saved me. How? She was 4 at the time, but she already knew shared food heals better than medicine. She started making little sandwiches for me, insisted we eat together. And little by little, I came back to life. Did you teach her that? No. I think she was born knowing. She's always been like that, even as a baby. If she saw someone sad, she'd offer a bite of what she was eating. Richard sat on the floor, not minding the dirt on his expensive suit. I wish I could be on their level. Dorothy, can I ask you a personal question? Of course, dear. Aren't you angry about the situation? About living here? About the exploitation? Dorothy smiled sadly. I used to be very angry. But anger is a weight that only hurts the one who carries it. I'd rather use my energy taking care of my family. But it's not fair. No, it's not. But life isn't always fair. All I can do is try to make the world a little better for those close to me. The simple wisdom of her words touched Richard deeply. She had lost everything, lived in dire conditions, yet hadn't lost her humanity. Mr. Richard, Dorothy said, can I give you some advice? Please. Emily told me you've been sick for months. The doctors can't figure out what's wrong, can they? That's true. It's because they're looking in the wrong place. Your sickness isn't in your body, it's in your soul. What do you mean? A starving soul can't nourish the body properly, and the soul starves when a person drifts too far from those who truly matter. And who truly matters? Only you can answer that, but I'll give you a hint. It's not the people who agree with everything you say. It's the ones who care when you're not well. Richard thought about the people around him. How many would truly care if he disappeared? How many were only there for the money or the power? Dorothy, do you think there's still time for me to change? Dear, as long as you're alive, there's time to change. The hard part isn't changing, it's deciding you want to. And how do you make that decision? Start small, do one good thing a day. Really see people, not just pass them by. At that moment, hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway. Emily tensed. That's my mom, she said. She won't like seeing you here. The door swung open and a young woman rushed in. She was as dark-skinned as Dorothy, thin, with exhaustion and worry etched on her face. When she saw Richard, she froze. Emily, what have you done? She said, clearly alarmed. Calm down, Tamika, Dorothy said. Mr. Richard is our friend. Mom, he can't be here. If Patricia finds out... Tamika, Richard interrupted. Don't worry. I won't cause trouble for you. The woman eyed him warily. With all due respect, sir, you don't understand the situation. If they find out we live here, we'll lose everything. I understand more than you think, Richard said, standing, and I'll do what I can to change it. How? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. Tamika seemed stunned. Why would you care about us? Because your daughter taught me that people matter more than rules. Emily beamed proudly. Dorothy nodded in approval. Tamika still looked skeptical, but a flicker of hope shone in her eyes. Mr. Richard, she said, you need to go back to your room before they notice you're gone. You're right, but I'll come back tomorrow, if you'll allow it. You'll always be welcome, Dorothy said. Richard returned to his room, his mind racing. For the first time in months, he had a clear purpose to help that family. But he knew it wouldn't be easy. Patricia had built a system that benefited her, and she wouldn't give it up without a fight. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He kept planning how to approach the situation. Confronting Patricia directly would only put the family at risk. He needed a more careful strategy. The next morning, he requested a meeting with Patricia. She arrived in her usual polished manner, a professional smile on her face. Richard, so good to see you in better spirits. The doctors say you're improving. Patricia, we need to talk about some of the hospital staff. His sister-in-law stiffened slightly. What kind of staff? The cleaning staff. I've been hearing comments about working conditions. I don't know what you're talking about. All employees are treated within the law. I'm sure of that. But I'd like to tour the facilities, get a better understanding of how the hospital operates. Richard, you're still recovering. Don't you think it's better to focus on your health? My health is great. In fact, I haven't felt this good in months. It was true. His conversations with Emily and her family had awakened an energy he hadn't felt in a long time. Well, if you insist, I can schedule a guided tour for next week. I'd prefer something more informal, this afternoon, for example. Patricia clearly didn't like his persistence. Richard, there are protocols to follow. The hospital has strict policies. What protocols? I own 40% of this place. Minority shareholder, she corrected, and still on medical leave. The tension between them was palpable. Richard realized Patricia was hiding something, and she noticed his suspicion. All right, he said. We'll do it your way. Schedule the tour. After Patricia left, Richard grew restless. He knew she'd use the time to cover up any irregularities. He needed to act faster. That afternoon, when Emily arrived for their shared snack, Richard was serious. Emily, I need to ask you something very important. What is it? I want you to show me exactly where your family lives, but without your mother knowing. And I want to see what her work is like. Why? Because I suspect you're being exploited, and I want to help. How are you going to help? I don't know yet. But first I need to understand the situation better. Emily thought for a moment. Okay, but it has to be at night when my mom's working. Deal. That night, around midnight, Emily appeared in Richard's room. She wore a coat too big for her and carried a small flashlight. Ready? She asked. Ready. They took the service elevators down again. The hospital at night was different, quieter, with dimly lit hallways. Emily guided him with the confidence of someone who knew every corner. There, she whispered, pointing to a woman mopping the floor in a distant hallway. Richard watched Tamika working. She moved quickly, cleaning not just the floors, but also the walls, organizing supplies, replacing trash bins. It was work meant for 3 people. She does all this alone? No, there were 2 others, but they quit last week. My mum's doing everyone's work now. And are you being paid extra for it? Emily looked down. No. Richard's anger grew. Patricia was clearly exploiting the family's vulnerability. Show me where you stay during the day. Emily led him to the basement. Beyond the small room where they slept, she showed him a storage area where they improvised meals, and even a corner where she tried to study with old books she found around the hospital. Emily, do you want to learn to read better? So much. But I can't go to school. What if I got you a private tutor? The girl's eyes lit up. Really? Really? But we need to fix your situation first. They returned to Richard's room with their heads full of plans. He now had enough information to confront Patricia, but he knew he had to be smart. The next day, instead of waiting for the guided tour, Richard showed up at Patricia's office unannounced. He found her on the phone, apparently arguing about finances. We need to talk, now, he said, ignoring the call. Patricia hung up, clearly annoyed. Richard, you can't just barge in here. Yes, I can, as a shareholder and as your brother-in-law. What do you want? I want to know why employees are living on hospital property. Patricia's face turned pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Patricia, I saw it. I saw the family living in the basement, the poor conditions, the overwork. If someone is living here illegally, I'll investigate and take appropriate action. Appropriate action? You mean firing a single mother and her family? Richard, there are rules. I can't make exceptions. But you can turn a blind eye when it suits you, right? Accepting unpaid extra work, cutting corners on hiring. That's a very serious accusation. It's the truth. And I'll take it to the board. Patricia stood up, trying to maintain her composure. Richard, you're not well. This obsession with employees shows your illness has affected your judgment. My judgment has never been clearer, and my health has never been better. The doctors disagree. Then I'll find other doctors. The argument was interrupted by a knock at the door. The secretary entered hesitantly. "Excuse me, but there's a child outside asking to speak with Mr. Richard." Patricia and Richard exchanged glances. It was Emily. "Send her in," Richard said. Emily walked into the elegant office with her usual ease. She greeted Patricia politely and turned to Richard. "Mr. Richard, my grandma isn't feeling well. Can you come see her?" "Of course," he said, standing immediately. "Richard," Patricia called, "we haven't finished our conversation." "Yes, we have. And I want a board meeting scheduled for next week." He left the office, followed by Emily, leaving Patricia visibly shaken. They hurried down to the basement. Dorothy was lying down, paler than usual, breathing with difficulty. "What happened?" Richard asked. "She got sick in the middle of the night," explained Tamika, who had been called in. "But I don't want to take her to the emergency room." "Why not?" "Because they'll ask questions. They'll want our address, our situation, and if they find out we live here..." Richard understood the dilemma. The family was trapped between needing medical care and the fear of losing what little they had. "Tamika, leave it to me. I'll call a trusted doctor to examine your mother right here." "You'd do that?" "Of course. And don't worry about questions. I'll take responsibility for everything." Richard made a few calls and managed to convince Dr. Reynolds, a friend and physician, to make a discreet visit. When he arrived, he examined Dorothy carefully. "It's early-stage pneumonia," he diagnosed. "Nothing serious if we treat it now, but she needs antibiotics and rest in a better ventilated space." "Can you treat her here?" Richard asked. "I can prescribe medication and monitor her, but honestly, this environment isn't suitable for someone who's sick." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Richard made an impulsive decision. "Tamika, I want you all to come stay with me temporarily. I have a large apartment with plenty of extra rooms." "Mr. Richard, we can't accept that." "Why not?" "Because it wouldn't be right. You barely know us." "I know enough. I know your character, your kindness, your honesty. That's more than I can say for many people who visit my home." Dorothy, weak as she was, smiled. "Accept, daughter. This man has a good heart." "But what about work?" Tamika asked. "If I leave here, I'll lose my job." "You won't. I'll make sure of it." "How?" "Trust me." That same afternoon, Richard arranged for the family to move into his apartment. It was a luxurious duplex in the Upper East Side, overlooking the park. When they walked in, Emily's jaw dropped. "Is all this yours?" she asked. It was. "Now it's ours." The apartment had 3 guest rooms. Richard settled Dorothy in the largest one, with a view of the garden. Tamika and Emily stayed in a room with 2 beds, decorated in cheerful colors. "Mr. Peterson," said Tamika, still in disbelief, "why are you doing this?" "Because you saved me. Literally saved me." "We didn't do anything special." "Yes, you did. You reminded me of what really matters in life." In the following days, the dynamic of the house changed completely. Dorothy recovered quickly in the airy, comfortable environment. Emily explored every corner of the apartment with childlike curiosity. Tamika, initially shy, began to feel more at ease. Richard discovered that having people in the house transformed everything. Meals, once lonely and flavorless, became moments of conversation and laughter. Dorothy, even while recovering, insisted on cooking, filling the house with aromas Richard hadn't smelled in years. "Mrs. Dorothy, you don't have to cook. I can hire a chef." "I don't want a chef. I want to cook for the people I care about." "But you need to rest." "Cooking isn't work when it's done with love. It's therapy." And it truly seemed to be. Dorothy gained color and energy each day, especially when she saw Richard and Emily eating her food with appetite. One evening during dinner, Emily asked a question that caught Richard off guard. "Mr. Peterson, do you have family?" "I have some relatives, but we're not close." "Why not?" "Because we had a disagreement about business a few years ago." "What kind of disagreement?" Richard hesitated. It was a painful story he'd rather not revisit. "My brother and I had a company together. He wanted to make decisions I thought were wrong. We ended up fighting and went our separate ways." "And you never spoke again?" "No." "Do you miss him?" Emily's simple question touched a wound Richard had kept closed for years. Sometimes. Then why don't you call him? Because he was the one who was wrong. What if he thinks the same about you? Dorothy and Tamika exchanged glances. The child's wisdom always surprised them. It's complicated, Emily. Is it complicated, or are you just proud? The question was too direct to ignore. Richard had to admit to himself that much of what kept him from his brother was wounded pride. Maybe you're right. My grandma always says pride is a stubborn creature that likes to live alone. Dorothy laughed. That's not exactly how I put it, sweetheart. But that's how I understood it. That night, Richard lay awake thinking about the conversation. When was the last time he'd thought of his brother without anger? When was the last time he remembered the good times they'd shared? The next morning he made a decision. He called Charles, his younger brother. Charles, it's Richard. There was a long silence on the other end. Richard? Wow, I can't believe it. I know it's been a long time, 5 years. Yeah, 5 years. Charles, I wanted to invite you to dinner. Dinner? Are you okay? I am. Better than I've been in a long time. What happened? It's a long story. Will you come? Of course. When? Tonight, if you can. Charles arrived in the late afternoon, clearly nervous. When Richard opened the door, the two studied each other. Charles had put on weight, with a few grey hairs. Richard was thinner but had a brightness in his eyes he hadn't had in years. Come in, said Richard. What a beautiful house. Did you move? No, I've always lived here. I just don't live alone anymore. Charles looked confused until Emily came running in. Mr. Peterson, Grandma wants to know if your brother likes stuffing. Charles, this is Emily. Emily, this is my brother Charles. The girl greeted Charles with the manners Dorothy had taught her. Nice to meet you, Mr. Charles. You look like Mr. Peterson, but you're chubbier. Charles laughed, charmed by the child's honesty. And you live here? Now we're set. Me, my mum, and my grandma. Mr. Richard brought us to live with him. Charles looked at Richard in surprise. Seriously? It's a long story, Richard repeated. During dinner, Charles met Dorothy and Tamika. He was struck by the obvious affection between everyone, especially how Richard interacted with Emily. Richard, he said when they were alone in the living room, you're completely different. How so? More human, more approachable. And is that good or bad? It's great. You seem at peace. I am. For the first time in years, I'm at peace. What happened? Richard told the whole story. The mysterious illness, meeting Emily, discovering the family's situation, his decision to help them. Incredible, said Charles. A 7-year-old girl managed to do what no one else could. Heal you. She taught me that physical illness is sometimes just a symptom of emotional sickness. And about our fight. Charles, I was wrong. At least partly. I was too proud to admit it. I was wrong too, also too proud. Want to try starting over? Very much. The brothers hugged for the first time in 5 years. Emily, who had quietly appeared in the room, smiled in satisfaction. See, she said, I told you pride likes to live alone. In the days that followed, Richard's house became a hub of activity. Charles started joining them for dinner, sometimes bringing his wife and kids. Dorothy loved cooking for more people. Tamika felt more and more like part of the family. But Richard knew he still had unfinished business at the hospital. The board meeting was approaching, and he needed to be prepared. One morning, he got an unexpected call from Patricia. Richard, we need to talk. About what? About your situation at the hospital and about other things. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can I come over? Sure. Patricia arrived an hour later, visibly tense. When she saw Tamika serving coffee, she was shocked. What is she doing here? Tamika lives here now, Richard said calmly. Richard, you can't be serious. You brought hospital staff into your home. I brought a family that was being exploited. Exploited? I offered them work and housing. You offered exploitation disguised as a favor. Patricia sat down, taking a deep breath. Richard, I'll be direct. If you take these accusations to the board, it'll hurt me badly. You should have thought of that before. Please, We can handle this another way. How? I can fix their situation. Give them a proper apartment, raise Tamika's salary. And in return, you drop the board meeting. Richard looked at Tamika, who had stopped serving coffee to listen. Tamika, what do you think? I don't know, Mr. Richard. You've already done so much for us. The decision is yours. Do you accept Patricia's offer, or do you want me to take this further? Tamika was silent for a long moment. Miss Patricia, she finally said, you exploited me for 2 years, made my daughter grow up without an education, let my mom live sick in a damp basement, and now that you've been caught, you want to bargain. Tamika, I'm not done. Mr. Richard could have taken your offer and forgotten about us, but he didn't. He brought us into his home, took care of my mom, is getting Emily into school. What are you saying? That I trust his judgment. If he thinks you should answer for what you did, then you should. Patricia paled. Richard, be reasonable. I am. Tamika made her choice. You're making a mistake. The board won't believe staff over an administrator. We'll see. The board meeting took place on a Thursday morning. Richard arrived accompanied by Tamika and a lawyer. Patricia came with her own legal counsel. The board consisted of 5 members, including Richard and Patricia. The other 3 were respected doctors who had invested in the hospital. Richard presented his complaint in an organized manner. He documented the family's living conditions, the unpaid overtime, and the exploitation of their vulnerable situation. Patricia defended herself by claiming she had offered humanitarian aid to a family in need, and that any irregularities were due to ignorance of the law, not bad faith. The turning point came when Tamika was called to testify. She told her story with simplicity and dignity, without dramatizing, simply stating the facts. For 2 years, she said, I worked 16 hours a day in exchange for an 8-hour wage and a damp basement for my family to live in. When I questioned it, Mrs. Patricia told me I should be grateful for the opportunity. Why didn't you look for other jobs? Asked one of the board members. Because my mother was sick and needed to stay near the hospital, and because we didn't have a fixed address to put on a resume. Do you feel exploited? I feel humiliated, not because of poverty, but because I was treated as if I weren't human. Tamika's words echoed in the silent room. When she finished, there was no doubt about the truth of her story. The board deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, the decision was unanimous. Patricia would be removed from her administrative duties, and the hospital would undergo a full audit of labor practices. Patricia, said the board chairman, you have the right to defend yourself, but the evidence is very clear. The hospital cannot be associated with exploitative practices. Patricia left the meeting furious but defeated. Before leaving, she approached Richard. You'll regret this. I won't. For the first time in years, I did the right thing. Because of a maid and a child. Because of a family that taught me what it means to be human. In the months that followed, much changed. The hospital underwent a complete administrative overhaul. Other irregularities beyond Tamika's situation were uncovered, including overcharging for medications and inadequate conditions for other employees. Tamika was promoted to cleaning supervisor, with fair wages and decent conditions. Most importantly, decent functional apartments were offered to all employees in need. Emily was enrolled in an excellent private school, where her natural intelligence could finally flourish. She excelled quickly, especially in writing, where she composed stories about people helping one another. Dorothy recovered fully and became a sort of adoptive grandmother to everyone who visited Richard's home. She cooked for guests, offered wise advice, and radiated a peace that touched everyone. Charles and Richard rebuilt their business partnership, but on a completely different foundation. They now included social criteria in their investments, always asking whether their decisions helped or harmed people. Richard himself radically changed his approach to business. He began personally visiting the companies he invested in, speaking with employees at all levels. He discovered it was possible to be both profitable and ethical, but the deepest change was personal. The house that had once been a museum of loneliness became a home full of life. Richard found joy in cooking with Dorothy, helping Emily with homework, and talking with Tamika about her dreams and plans. One evening, 6 months after that first meeting at the hospital, Richard was in the living room reading when Emily approached. "Mr. Richard, can I ask you something?" "You always can." "Do you still feel sick?" Richard thought about the question. Physically, he was better than ever. But it wasn't just that. The constant anguish he carried had disappeared. The emptiness he tried to fill with work and money was no longer there. "No," he said. "I don't feel sick." "So did I manage to heal you?" "You did, all of you did." "How?" "You taught me that the best medicine is love." Emily smiled and snuggled next to him on the couch. "Mr. Richard?" "Yes?" "Now you can teach other people not to get sick with this illness." "How?" "By sharing food with them, sharing kindness, sharing time." "That's a good idea." "So shall we do it?" "Let's." And they did. Richard transformed the hospital into a model of humanization. He created a program where patients and staff shared meals together, breaking down hierarchical barriers. He established a fund to help employees in need. Most importantly, he made a rule. No patient should eat alone if they didn't want to. The food and fellowship program spread to other hospitals. The simple idea that nourishing the body along with the heart was more effective than any medicine won over doctors and patients across the country. Emily, now 8 years old, became a sort of mascot for the program. She visited lonely patients, always offering to share something: a snack, a story, a drawing. Her presence brightened the once cold and impersonal hallways. Tamika graduated from a nursing technician course Richard funded. She dreamed of helping other families going through hardships, and now she had the knowledge and position to do so. Dorothy, at 72, discovered a new calling: teaching therapeutic cooking. She gave classes to caregivers and patients' families, showing how cooking with love could heal both the giver and the receiver. 1 year after that first encounter, Richard organized a special celebration. He invited everyone touched by the program: patients who had recovered, staff who had been helped, families who had reunited. The party was held in the hospital's main hall, decorated with drawings Emily had made throughout the year. Each drawing told the story of someone who had been healed, not just of physical illness, but of loneliness. During the celebration, Richard asked to speak. "A year ago," he said, "I was dying of an illness no doctor could diagnose, until a 7-year-old girl walked into my room and offered me a cure in exchange for my lunch." The audience laughed and applauded. Emily, seated in the front row next to Dorothy and Tamika, blushed with embarrassment and pride. "Today I know my illness was simple," Richard continued. "It was a lack of human connection. It was forgetting that we're meant to live together, not alone. Emily taught me that shared food nourishes more than solitary meals. Mrs. Dorothy taught me that cooking with love is an act of healing. Tamika taught me that dignity is priceless. And all of you taught me that the best remedy for any ailment is having people who care about you." The applause was long and heartfelt. When it faded, Emily raised her hand. "Can I say something?" "Of course," said Richard. The girl climbed onto the stage with her usual ease. "I just wanted to say that Mr. Richard was wrong about one thing." The audience grew curious. "He said I healed him. But really, he healed himself. I just shared my food with him." "And what's the difference, someone in the crowd asked. "The difference is that anyone can do it. Anyone can share something with someone in need. You don't have to be rich or a doctor. You just have to notice who's sad and offer a little piece of what you have." The child's simple wisdom moved everyone present. Many cried, others smiled. Everyone felt inspired. "That's why," Emily concluded, "everyone here can heal someone too. You just have to share." The party went on late into the night, with people of all ages and walks of life talking, laughing, and most of all, sharing. Famous doctors ate sandwiches made by janitors. Patients swapped recipes with nurses. Children played with the elderly. Richard watched it all with a sense of fulfillment he'd never known before. His life had purpose again. His heart was full. His family, even though it was a chosen one, not biological, was real and true. When the party ended and everyone had left, Richard stayed behind in the hall with Emily, Dorothy, and Tamika. They helped him gather the drawings and stack the chairs. "Mr. Richard," Emily said as she folded a tablecloth, "now you'll never get sick with that sickness again, right?" "Why?" "Because now you know the cure." "And what's the cure?" "Love served on the spoon of friendship." Dorothy laughed. "Where do you come up with these sayings, child?" "From the heart, Grandma. From the heart." That night, when they got home, Richard felt overwhelming gratitude. He looked at this family who had saved his life simply by being themselves, generous, unpretentious, true. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" Tamika asked. "For teaching me how to live again." "We're the ones who should thank you," Dorothy said. "You gave us back our dignity." "No," Richard corrected. "You always had dignity, I just recognized it." Emily yawned. "Can I sleep in your bed tonight, Mr. Richard, like when I was little?" "You're still little," he chuckled. "And yes, you can." That night, with Emily asleep beside him and the soft sound of Dorothy and Tamika talking in the kitchen, Richard knew for certain he had found true wealth. It wasn't in the money he'd accumulated, but in the people he'd chosen to love, and who loved him back. 2 years later, the Food and Fellowship program was running in 50 hospitals across the United States. Richard had created a foundation to expand the initiative and train professionals in what Dorothy liked to call the medicine of affection. Emily, now 9, had written a children's book about her experience. The Girl Who Healed with Food became a bestseller, and she donated all the royalties to the foundation. Tamika was studying psychology, specializing in family therapy. Her dream was to help other families overcome hardships by strengthening their emotional bonds. Dorothy, at 74, had become an internet sensation. Her videos teaching recipes of kindness had millions of views. She always ended them with the same line: "Remember, children, food without love only fills the stomach. Food with love feeds the soul." Richard married again, not out of loneliness, but love. He met Helen, a volunteer doctor at the foundation, and fell for the way she cared for the most difficult patients. The wedding was simple, held at their home, with Emily as the flower girl and Dorothy cooking for all the guests. Mercy General Hospital became a global model for compassionate healthcare. Medical students came from all over to learn about the American model of holistic treatment, but perhaps the greatest achievement was the personal transformation of each of them. Richard learned that leading meant serving. Tamika discovered her voice mattered and deserved to be heard. Dorothy realized her wisdom was a treasure to be shared. And Emily? Emily grew up knowing that a simple act of kindness could change the world. She remained the child who offered help to those in need, but now she had the resources and knowledge to do even more. In a television interview 5 years after their first meeting, the reporter asked Richard what had been the most important moment of his life. "It was when a 7-year-old girl asked me for my lunch," he answered without hesitation. "And why was that moment so special? Because she didn't ask for my money, my influence, or my power. She asked for the only thing I could truly give: attention and care." And what did that change? Everything. It taught me that true wealth isn't in what we accumulate, but in what we share. The camera then focused on Emily, now 12 years old, sitting beside him. "And you, Emily, what did you learn from all this?" "I learned that everyone has something to offer and something to receive. The secret is to pay attention to each other." "Any advice for the children watching?" "Yes. If you see someone sad or lonely, offer them something. It could be food, a drawing, or just a smile. You'll see that healing someone is easy. The hard part is noticing who needs to be healed." When the interview ended, Richard hugged Emily. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For saving my life." "I didn't save your life, Mr. Peterson. You chose to live." "And what's the difference?" "The difference is that now you can help others choose to live too." And that's exactly what he did. Every day Richard woke up grateful for a family who loved him, a purpose that motivated him, and the certainty that his life mattered to someone. The disease of loneliness had been completely cured, not by expensive medicine or sophisticated treatments, but by the oldest and most effective remedy in the world: love shared in everyday life, served at the table of life with generosity and simplicity. The end of the story. Now tell us, what did you think of this story of transformation? Have you ever experienced a similar situation where a small gesture changed everything? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories.